Perfect. Welcome or bienvenue. Welcome once again to another property live stream. This is Cladding Matters, arguably our most strident of our various podcasts. This one talks about everything to do with building safety, particularly in the event of fire risk, etc. But we have an extra issue which seems to have loomed its ugly head. Today's topic is leasehold reform and the cost of unsafe buildings, starting us off as ever. Hamish McClay.
Well, good afternoon to you all, and welcome to obviously getting very close to the weekend, considering the time of day. Our Cladding Matters always goes out here on as close as we can to 1 o'clock, and this week is no different. Other than the fact what we're actually sort of celebrating, for those of pagans amongst you, or Celts and all the rest of it, or even Christians, we're celebrating the arrival of light. There is light coming into our lives because, you know, churches are full of candles. It's a celebration of Candlemas and Bridget's Day in bulk, all of these things. And unfortunately, that is not happening in all this stuff we're trying to deal with. I mean, yes, we do actually call it Cladding Matters, and it is to do with cladding. I don't know another title that we could use, but it did start off with cladding. But we find there are many, many other complications which come into those very buildings that require cladding. And it's as much a safety issue. So we do have the safety issue, which is absolutely vitally important. We also sort of have the health issue, because many people caught up because of the imposition of some of these aspects which are actually sort of going on. We have this serious impact upon some people's health. And this is where we must get Melissa on to speak. In fact, I think we've got Melissa speaking with us very shortly about the health sort of side of things. But there is one other impact, which is the financial one, which, of course, that itself can impose certain aspects relative to, if somebody's concerned about their finances, that does impact upon their health. And we know, in fact, already, many of you, if you've listened on a regular basis, know that one of Steve's very close friends, she actually sort of took her own life because of the impracticalities of what was being imposed upon her financially. Now, we do have, unfortunately, a government that chooses to try and change, I think, a bit too much at the same time. And what they're looking to do now is to do something about leaseholds. And we've been speaking about commonhold in this country. Apparently it works in Australia. Must have a conversation actually with our friend in Australia, Steve, at some stage. See how it does. This commonhold does work. But there's another very, very deep thing. But for the moment in time, there is an attempt by the present government to somehow or other improve. Now, their words about improvement, we know what about this is. They want to improve our relationship. But we won't get into politics. Quiet, Hamish, calm down. We won't speak about politics. We best keep it to speak about sort of buildings and the impositions that are like this sort of, or the explosions that are like to come about as a consequence of this freehold reform, which Steve knows very, very much about, because he's trapped there in Royal Artillery Quays with a number of other leaseholders. There's, I don't know if there are any freeholders there, but some parts of sort of social housing, there's a complete mix of so many different styles of sort of characters in one building. It's amazing, the mix of so many different styles of paying for it, renting it, whether they're mortgage owners and all sorts of things. And I'm sure Steve will be able to unwrap.
Well, I'm going to throw him into the lion's den immediately. Steve Day, welcome as ever, friend of the show, and also ongoing campaigner, buildingsafetyscheme.org. Please do go visit. Now, Today's topic is leasehold reform and the cost of unsafe buildings. What say you, sir?
Well, so let's just recap them. So, I mean, it's been quite big in the news. The government have basically said we'll do peppercorn ground rent, but in 40 years' time. So I don't know what you guys are doing in 40 years' time, but it's a long time to wait.
I've got no clue. I've got no clue, and nor do most of the people involved. It's like it's kicking it down the lane.
Yeah. So that's one thing, and that's important because the new buildings, new blocks of flats have basically had it banned to peppercorn. So we have a 2-tier system. So the problem is that, you know, if you buy a new block of flats, you'd have to pay this ground rent, and for an old, you know, existing one, you do. They have capped it at 250 a year, but that would come in from 2028. So again, you know, this is a long time to wait for all of these reforms. But the problem with all of this is the fact that whether you like them or not, and you know, I'm not a fan of any company that comes in to make money out of your home. Firstly, you know, I think it's wrong to make huge profit out of leasehold, which is effectively where we are. And I'm a leaseholder myself. So my big problem isn't the ground rent, which is, for me, it's quite small. It's 150 a year. It's the £6,700 a year service charge. That's where my problem is. And I believe that is made up of all the capitalist markup on every service provided. Every single one has a huge markup for their profit margins and potentially paying back their investors and all the rest of it. That is the problem. And that is not addressed by the 250 cap. Now, it does help those that are paying doubling ground rents. I admit that, but it isn't the big root cause of leasehold abuse. The leasehold abuse is happening in the markup on the service charge. And the other point is that if we have common hold, it basically means you've got to, you know, effectively manage the building safety with a managing agent. And it's that abuse in the service charge, which is perpetrated by all the service providers, but also the managing agent and so on. You'd have to manage that relationship yourself. Now, I'm not against common hold, but you know, adds a complexity if you're now responsible legally for all the building remediation, you know, making sure those defects are addressed, because the Building Safety Act makes a residence management company liable, and criminally liable as well. And also, it doesn't necessarily, you know, solve the service charge problems, even if you can control them. It may help, but it's a huge responsibility. And our point is, if you're going to do all of that, then you need to basically ensure that you've got protection from building defects. And right now, the protection in the Building Safety Act is made up of developer funding, taxpayer funding, and the freeholders themselves. Now, if we push them out the market by capping their income, and they wind up their companies and they say, well, you can enjoy looking after your building safety defects, and that will be that. And then all the protection from the freeholder funding in the Building Safety Act is now pushed back on the leaseholder. And yes, it may be the case that they don't have to pay for the building defects, but there's no one to pay because you removed them. And so therefore you'll start with limbo, and they will end up paying for the defects because they want to sell their homes. They need to live there. The insurers may throw them out if they don't remediate the defects. And also the fire brigade can come in and, you know, demand that the work is done by the resident management company. So there's no escaping this liability. And so I think my concern is that by eliminating the freeholders without the polluter pays amendments, we could end up in an even worse situation than we have. So there's 3 areas now in building safety. There's one, as a result of this, the 250 cap, that the freeholders, some of them exit the market through insolvency and push that liability onto the leaseholders. 2, the watered down, dangerous PAS 9980 remediation standard they want to sneak into law. And then 3, the 1.7 million excluded leaseholders, like my friend Amanda, who was excluded cruelly from all protections from building defects. And, you know, those are the 3 issues. So I think this common hold and leasehold reform needs to be linked with polluter pays, our amendments, to ensure that if the freeholder funding disappears, is compromised, there is a backstop.
And what is your sense of it? Do you think there's any interest in doing that outside of? I mean, is there a groundswell of dissatisfaction with that?
Well, the problem is the campaign. You know, it's all being very confused by the campaign groups. You know, you'll never hear the leasehold abolition campaigns talk about the need to ensure that if they want to push the freeholders out of the market, they also need to ensure the freeholder funding is funded by another company, another set of companies. Right. Because otherwise, where's that funding going to come from? So they don't say that. They just say, oh, the freeholders are evil. But they don't think about the building safety aspect. And I've been banging on about both. I'm not anti pushing the freeholders out of the market, but I am anti doing that and blowing up the funding without an additional funding source for building safety defects. And frankly, with the 77% defect rate in Taylor Wimpey and the others, you know, I don't think the defect rates have been solved. I think they're still going on. And we've had a few whistleblowers contact me recently in the last few weeks to give that view that, yeah, they're still making the same mistakes with fire stopping, missing ablative bats, missing sort of compartmentation between party walls. And, you know, you're going to need all these protections for new buildings as well. So I think the right thing is to avoid going to court. So you'd have to pay £500,000 to get your defects fixed.
Right.
Have a scheme where if you have defects, then the construction industry funds them, either the developer if they exist or the industry if they don't. And that will deal with these issues that we have with the pushing out of freeholders from leasehold and the transition to common hold, which seems to be the way the government wants to go. But I think it's going to be an interesting fight because, you know, you're effectively taking an income stream away from freeholders.
I mean, I was going to say, Hamish, it just feels like what we're doing, what is potentially happening, is you're taking away that income stream, and so of course they're rah-rah-rahing because they're worried about losing revenue.
Well, it's not just losing revenue; it's about pushing them into insolvency. It is their only revenue, and you know the government risk assessments have said if you take away the ground rent, they will become insolvent, or some of them will. And that's my point. If you're pushing them into insolvency and they're paying the building remediation bills, then who's going to pay now? And that's right. That's the dangerous sort of tightrope we're on now. Will they stay in the market at their 250, depreciating every year till zero, or will they exit early? And that means absolute chaos for building safety.
Hamish, what's your thoughts?
Well, we're back to the same thing again. I mean, everybody has the right to live in a home which is considered to be safe.
Yeah.
And from that particular perspective, genuinely these people they bought themselves into a particular property. Sometimes there's no other way out of it, or into it, I should say, other than purchasing that lease. So they're dependent upon that lease to actually sort of get them there and established. And through total, not so much innocence, but there was an awareness of it. At least you knew what was going on until we came across this building safety issue, which first of all was to do with cladding. And that's, as Steve rightly points out, it's not just cladding, it's what's going inside of it. And I think that the way we create a standard, which is not an acceptable standard for any new build, and is willing to leave buildings unsafe, and it is unsafe in the minds of the insurance people. We know we all blame insurance people, but they are there to cover us in certain instances. But if they turn around and say, hey, look, this is a fire risk. If we have to cover this fire risk, this is what we have to charge, which is natural enough. And you can understand that. But added to that, of course, you've got the mortgage. How do you get a mortgage for a place like this, which is considered unsafe? And some mortgage lenders are very unkeen. They will push the ante up. If you're lucky to be able to get a mortgage, that deposit could be that little bit higher, or a lot higher, in fact. But then, of course, you combine all of these, you put them together. The freeholder is charging a certain amount of money because they know what's happening. But there is no single straightforward way of this whole thing being improved unless somebody actually takes time out and says, right, okay, let's get the building sorted. Let's use this fund, which in fact, which is what the building safety scheme is all about. Let's get this fund used effectively. Let's get it used across the board. The pooper pays idea, or the person that created that mess in the first place, should be mainly responsible for it. There are occasions they're no longer with us. So something needs to be sorted before we can actually even think about changing it. Because with all of these things that are sort of floating around, it's far too complicated. And we know 1.7 million people already are excluded from the present sort of idea that the government has to improve matters. But we're just going to make matters even worse and create a massive great hornet's nest in terms of what's going to be going on if we cannot sort out who is going to be responsible for that payment.
And on that bombshell, I'm going to say thank you so much, Steve Day from the Building Safety Scheme.org, and of course Hamish McLeod, Sir Convey, our Lord and Master, helped me set this up in the first place. Please do come back. We're here every Friday on or around 1 o'clock, and we discuss all things to do with building safety. Now, that could be cladding. That could be what happens when you take the cladding off and you find out the potentially not quite so savoury elements underneath. But it also could be leasehold reform and the way in which this progresses, because we are at this nexus point. We're at this interesting thing where things are now out in the open. You can't hide it. We can all see that the emperor has no clothes. Now, what the next bit is, what the hell are we going to do about it? So please watch this as it unfolds. Until next week, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please try and look after your mental health. Bye-bye now.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll polish through the moon, but their word always fails.